I made it very, very clear that under no circumstances is this government going to provide permanent protection visas to people who have arrived illegally in Australia by boat. It doesn't matter whether they turned up 2 years, 3 years ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 days ago. It's not going to happen under this government, and for a very important reason. That's what we promised the Australian people we would do. And we promised the Australian people we would do that because you must be consistent when it comes to matters of border protection policy. It's either the right thing to do to hand someone a permanent visa, the reward of permanent residency in Australia, the promise that was made to them by a people smuggler. It's either the right thing to do or it's the wrong thing to do. And the Coalition has always believed that it is the wrong thing to do. You do not reward people arriving illegally in Australia by boat. You do not fulfil the promises of people smugglers made to those who have come by that method. You do not provide that outcome. You deny that outcome. And it is important that you act with consistency across all the measures and all the actions that you have. There is absolutely no doubt that the decision for someone to get a permanent visa here in Australia who had been waiting for one from the previous government, if this government had done that, then that would have sent, I think, very negative messages to those all the way up through the chain about what now might be on offer in Australia. The people smugglers tell lies, and they use decisions that are made here on policy in this country to spread their lies. And any suggestion that someone might be able to get a permanent visa in Australia for those who may have already been here or who may come needs to be completely and totally negated. Now, for those seeking to come to Australia, they are of course sent to Nauru and Manus, and they're sent in quick order. That has been a key change under this government's implementation of the regional resettlement arrangement, which has had significant impact. But for those who are already here, who are in constant contact up the chain, they also need to know that those policies apply right across the board. The other night, the Labor Party and the Greens repeated their worst decision when they were in government together, which was to abolish temporary protection visas. They repeated that history, and the government has responded with the following. By a legislative instrument under Section 85 of the Migration Act, I have moved to cap the number of offshore protection visas Class XA, of which the only subclass is the 866 visa, which is for onshore applicants for protection, at 1,650, which is the number that have already been provided this year. That means that no further protection visas can be provided to onshore applicants this financial year, which takes us obviously through to June 30. This is a non-disallowable instrument. It has come into effect today as a result of its registration yesterday, and it has been cleared by the Office of Best Practice Regulation, which is set out in the Memorandum of Understanding. Further to that, under Section 46A of the Migration Act, the Minister must lift a statutory bar, as many of you will be aware, to enable applications for protection visas to be made by persons who have arrived illegally by boat. I have no intention of lifting any bar so long as in this country the option of temporary protection visas is not available. There will be no lifting of that bar as long as those arrangements stay in place. What impact does this have on those who might be offshore, waiting in camps or elsewhere? Absolutely nothing. One of the first things we did with the refugee and humanitarian program was, for the first time in decades, we de-linked the program for refugee and humanitarian resettlement in Australia from the process of handing out visas to those who turn up illegally by boat. Under this government, no longer is it the case that someone who turns up on a boat takes the place of someone who is waiting offshore in a camp or somewhere even more serious. The effect of my decision in relation to what Labor and the Greens have done in the Senate leaves those applicants completely unaffected. We still have the absolute certainty of the number of places that have been provided for those applicants, and those processes will continue as normal, including, for example, the 500 places we've made under that program in relation to the Syrian conflict. So that is an important thing to note in relation to these matters. What will happen with those who are affected by this with onshore applicants, particularly those who are illegal maritime arrivals? They will remain on the visas that the previous government gave them, which are bridging visas. Those bridging visas entitle people to 89% of a special benefit payment, and there are no work rights attached to those visas. They are the conditions that the previous government put in place for bridging visas. And we have a caseload of 33,000 people, more than 20,000 of which are actually out on those bridging visas. The balance are in community detention and held detention. Of those 33,000 people, those are people who arrived predominantly after August of 2012 and haven't had their processing completed or their cases finalised. And so I find it a bit rich for the opposition today to be complaining about our decision today when they allowed people not to be processed for such a long period of time by their own decision when they placed them on bridging visas. So these are the measures that we have taken. We take very seriously our commitments to the Australian people. We have a clear mandate to introduce temporary protection visas. Whether people like those measures or they don't like those measures, they're our measures. They're measures we took to the Australian people. They were affirmed by the Australian people. And what the Labor and the Greens have done is they've voted against what the Australian people voted for. And I think they do that at their own political peril.